What is happening, baby? Welcome back to the Huddle Chat Sports Network's very own Fantasy Football Huddle, presented as always by DanklyfeBrand. Let's talk sports and shank it golf brand. I am your favorite one-armed host of your favorite small-scale sports network, Dallas Clark, and we're here today continuing our coverage of the Week 10 startums and situms. Our last episode in part 1, we went over the quarterbacks, we went over the tight ends, and we went over the defenses that we want to start and sit this week. Today we're going over running backs, wide receivers, and place kickers. So without further ado, fill up your cup, roll something up, and let's get right into the startums and situms, running through the running backs like we like to do. I'd like to take a moment to speak to y'all Tony Pollard owners across the fantasy football multiverse. Tony Pollard owners, rejoice. This week is going to be the week for Tony Pollard. I know it's been depressing being a Tony Pollard owner. He's put up single digits in 5 of his last 6 games. But like I said, it's time to rejoice. This is the week. Tony Pollard playing the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers have allowed 15 or more points to 8 running backs this season. And 2 of those running backs have put over 20 points. So I'm liking Tony Pollard for a bounce back week this week. Another bounce back, Aaron Jones against the Los Angeles Chargers. He's been maddening. He's put up single digits in all but 1 game in his last 5. You're looking at the Los Angeles Chargers putting up double digits to 10 running backs this season. 7 of them putting up 16 or more. 2 of those 7 putting up 26 or more points. Aaron Jones should be in for a delightful Sunday, as should you if you start him. I'm starting James Conner against the Houston Texans. He had 16 touches last week in his first game back, and the numbers really weren't great, but the volume is what I'm paying attention to. He got that premier back role. James Conner's job is still James Conner's job. The Houston Texans have allowed 11 plus points to 10 different running backs this season, 4 of which have put up 17 or more points this season. So start James Conner. I'm also starting Brian Robinson Jr. He was listed as a starter last week, and he put up his career best game, 119 yards and a touchdown. I'm keeping him in starting lineups. He's in the running back 2 flex conversation this week against the New York Giants. And they've allowed the second most rushing yards and an average of 23.1 points per game to running backs this season. So Brian Robinson should be definitely hammered into your starting lineup. I'm also starting Javonte Williams against the Vikings, Devin Singletary against the Arizona Cardinals, and Ty Chandler, who we talked about on the waiver wire pickup episode against the Denver Broncos. Running backs to stay away from them. And this week, I apologize to tell y'all this, man, but Isaiah Pacheco for the Kansas City Chiefs against the Eagles, this is the week to sit him. He's been in a bit of a rut. He's put up less than 7 points in back-to-back games, and I'm not looking at a bounce back for him against the Eagles, who have no team has allowed fewer rushing yards this season or fewer fantasy points per game to running backs than the Philadelphia Eagles. So stay away from Isaiah Pacheco if you can afford it. I'm also going to be staying away from Najee Harris against the Cleveland Browns. I know it's tough to sit him with his recent success, but Cleveland has allowed just 1 touchdown and the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs this season. So stay away from Najee Harris if you can avoid it. I'm also going to be staying away from James Cook. He's had an up and down roller coaster of a season. And I look at him as a risk or reward flex against the New York Jets. He's got a low ceiling against the New York Jets. He put up only 42 yards in their first matchup. So I'm not looking at James Cook having a great game. This also is going to be a potentially low-scoring, negative game script for James Cook and the Buffalo Bills. So running is not really going to be an option for them, I don't think. D'Onta Foreman against the Lions is not going to be a good start this week either. Sit him down. He's been on fire in recent weeks. However, it's a bad matchup against the Lions, and Khalil Herbert may be returning this week as well, so it's going to muddy up this backfield even more than it already is. Stay away from D'Onta Foreman. I'm also staying away from Hubs, man. Chuba Hubbard against the Dallas Cowboys. He's taken over as the lead back officially in this backfield, but it's a bad matchup, and I think game script is going to be an issue this game as well. The Panthers are going to be down and down heavily early, and Bryce Young is going to have to pull a miracle off if the Panthers can really stand a chance in this game. I'm also staying away from Gus Edwards against the Cincinnati Bengals, Miles Sanders against the Dallas Cowboys, and Kareem Hunt versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Moving on into the wide receivers, I'm going to be starting Terry McLaurin against the Giants. Last week was his first real disappointing underperformance, but I'm keeping him in my starting lineup against the New York Giants, man. They're allowing the 2nd most points per game to wide receivers, and historically scary Terry beats up on the New York Giants. Last time they played in week 7, he put up 90 yards and 15 fantasy points. So I'm liking Terry McLaurin this week. Keep him in your lineup. I'm also starting Brandon Ayuk in my lineup. He only had 3 catches last week, but he made them count. He put up a touchdown and 14.5 fantasy football points last week. He's playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are allowing 5 touchdowns and the 5th most fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. I'm also going to be starting Christian Kirk against the Tennessee Titans. He's been a consistent slot wide receiver. Last week, put up 104 yards and 14.4 fantasy football points. He's playing the Tennessee Titans, who have allowed the 7th most fantasy football points per game to wide receivers. And in 2 of his 3 career games against Tennessee, Christian Kirk has put up 20 or more points twice out of those 3 career games. I'm also going to be starting Tank Dell versus the Cardinals. He's put up 18 plus points 4 times in the last 7 weeks. He's been really a savior for a lot of us in fantasy football this season. He's playing the Cardinals, who have let the 5th most points per game to perimeter wide receivers where Tank Dell plays. So I like the build for Tank Dell this week. I'm also going to be starting Courtland Sutton against the Minnesota Vikings. He's been not posting huge totals, but he's had a solid, safe floor. He's a viable flex versus Minnesota, who are allowing top 10 points per game to wide receivers this season. Also putting in my lineup DJ Moore against the Detroit Lions, DeAndre Hopkins against the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Rashee Rice versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Sit of the week this week is going to be Adam Thielen versus the Cowboys if you can afford it. Thielen's numbers have been beginning to decline over the past few weeks, and I would at least temper my expectations. The Cowboys are allowing the 2nd fewest points per game to slot wide receivers, where Adam Thielen lines up 95% of the time. So I'm staying away from Adam Thielen if I can afford it. I'm also going back and staying away from George Pickens against the Cleveland Browns, man. He's continuing his decline since Deontay Johnson came back, and I'm continuing to bench him. You're looking at him also playing the Cleveland Browns, who have allowed the fewest points per game to wide receiver this season. So nothing looks good for George Pickens this week. I'm also going to unlock it and take Tyler Lockett out of my lineup this week. It's been tough to sit him, but I'm at least tempering my expectations. He has been playing the Los Angeles Rams, and the Rams are tough on the wide receiver position this season. Tyler Lockett has been under 12 points in 5 of his 7 matchups against Los Angeles Rams in PPR formats, so I'm definitely going to avoid him if I can. I'm also avoiding Gabe Davis against the Jets. He's been one of the hardest to predict fantasy football players this season. He's been basically all or nothing. He either gets all the attention in the Buffalo Bills offense or absolutely nothing, and it's hard to predict when he does get that attention. You're looking at him playing the New York Jets, who have allowed no touchdowns and the fewest points per game to wide receivers. In week 1, when Gabe Davis matched up against the Jets, they held him to 5.2 fantasy points. So I'm staying away from Gabe Davis this week. Also avoiding Brandon Cooks against Carolina, Deontay Johnson against Cleveland, Hollywood Brown against Houston, and Jerry Jeudy versus Minnesota. Moving on into the place kickers that I trust this week, I'm starting the Cleveland Browns' Dustin Hopkins versus Pittsburgh. I'm starting Brandon McManus versus Tennessee. I'm starting the Seattle Seahawks' Jason Myers versus the Rams. I'm starting Buffalo Bills' Tyler Bass against the Jets. And I'm starting Greg Joseph versus the Denver Broncos for the Minnesota Vikings. Kickers to stay away from this week, Chris Boswell versus Cleveland. I'm also staying away from Nick Folk against the Jaguars. Dan Carlson against Miami. His younger brother, Anders Carlson. Actually, I'm kidding. I don't know if they're brothers. But stay away from Anders Carlson against the Chargers. And Greg the Leg Zuerlein versus the Buffalo Bills. That's going to do it for part 2 of the Week 10 Stardoms and Situms. We're going to have a trade episode before the end of the week, as well as our live episode for Week 10, our live NFL kickoff show, 9:30 to 9:45 Mountain Standard Time, 11:45 Eastern Standard Time. We only run about a half an hour, so come stop by, say what's up, get some lineup advice, and ask any questions that you might have about your fantasy football team. Now, that's going to do it for today. As always, keep your chin up and your attitude down. I'll see y'all next time. Peace out.